Okay, back to part 2 of Fair Use, the Truth and the Lie. In the previous video we spoke about the conditions that would allow anything you do to fall within fair use. It has to be non-substantial, it can't create a substitute, it can't deprive the original copyright holder, it must be for a secondary purpose, commentary, education, parody, criticism. It can't involve personal gain. It helps if you fully credit the source. The work can be transformative. So, we begin again. Also, simply stating that your copyrighted content is fair use does not make it so. It must fall within the guidelines listed above. Fair use exists for a reason. It is somewhere between impractical and impossible for the average person to get permission from a copyright holder, which in my opinion is precisely why fair use exists. But in the modern world, fair use is not really fair because it only exists for the very rich. It only exists for the people who have the resources to apply for copyright permission. The very people who don't need the doctrine of fair use. It can, I can use nearly any content I want under the standard and guidelines of fair use, as long as I've got $1 million in my pocket and I don't mind throwing it away, defending a fair use claim. In short, despite being a clear legal precedent, despite having been soundly defended in court many times across the span of history, fair use doesn't exist. Because those in 100% compliance with it simply don't have the resources to defend themselves. You say you need permission. In my mind, that's akin to saying you need to give me a moon rock. Then you can use whatever material you want. It makes a nearly impossible and unfair request of people who are trying to stay within the bounds of the legal standard of fair use. What good is a standard like fair use if it only applies to the very rich? If it only applies to people who don't really need the doctrine of fair use? If it only applies to people with the resources necessary to defend themselves? A law in theory means nothing if it cannot be put into practice. And this is precisely what the media companies have done. They've conspired to make the firm, clear, repeatedly upheld in court of law doctrine of fair use null and void. They have made it so that only the people with $1 million to throw away can ever hope to assert a fair use claim. Now I ask you, is that justice? Now finally, because we live in a sad world dominated by lawsuits, I must make the following disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving legal advice. I'm simply ranting about how complex and unfair the concept of fair use is being enforced. I take no responsibility for you making a fair use claim and not having $1 million in your pocket to back it up. A last note about YouTube. A copyright holder complains to YouTube that you violated their copyright. YouTube is simply an archive. It doesn't do any good to complain to them because they're not making the claim. And you can't expect YouTube to go into court and legally defend your fair use claim. That's up to you. It's between you and the copyright holder and the $1 million burning a hole in your pocket. You need to go into court. You need to make the fair use claim. And despite the fact that you may be 100% in compliance with the legal standard of fair use, If you haven't got $1 million, you can't back it up. And that's the end of part 2.